Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Thriving Doctors podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Willis. Lovely to have you on the show. Thank you for extending your working day to be with us today. Looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Simon. I'm looking forward to it also.
So we've had a few Kiwis on the show, a few people from New Zealand. I think we've had more Kiwis on the show than we've had people from Yorkshire. So
really?
That's really, yeah. So thank you for joining us today. Joe lives on the North Island of New Zealand in a place called Hawke's Bay, which is about 6 hours from Auckland. So I've not been to Hawke's Bay, but I have been to Auckland and now to the Queenstown. So maybe next time I will see a little bit more of the country. So healing. Does this healing word resonate with you, Joe?
Yes, it does. Initially, that question takes me up into sort of a broader sense, to be honest. Healing is a journey of becoming whole, like being an authentic human being, connected to and belonging within oneself. I think healing for me has meant outgrowing the influence of the impact of my adoption experience over many decades, to be honest, to a place now where I experience many more moments without feeling adoption is all of me, or that I'm triggered or feelings are surfacing for me. And that healing began really, or the outgrowing journey began, like many adoptees, I was outwardly appeared to have adapted well to my adoptive circumstances, which made healing a challenge until I didn't actually have a choice at 27 years old. From the outside, what looked like the perfect life. I had been reunited with my birth parents, and I had married my childhood sweetheart, had 2 beautiful children. But on the inside, I was racked with panic attacks and agoraphobia at one stage. So for me, healing really began when the cracks, I could no longer keep everything inside. I'll keep it under wraps. So that was really wasn't a voluntary healing beginning, to be honest. I would, if I could have kept it under there, I would have. But yes, I think that was all part of waking up, at a soul level, at my essential self level, just wanted not to live this way anymore. So I guess it was waking up to the realization that something had happened to me, not just something wrong with me. And although it wasn't my fault, it actually now was my responsibility. So those are all the things, I guess, that came together that catalysted that healing journey for me.
Wow. There's a million things there. You speak so concisely and eloquently about this, and you've clearly done so much work because you're a coach, right? So you've done a lot of reflection on your own experience, it sounds, and a lot. You express it. There's about 7 different tacks that I can go for from there. So there's one bit that really appeals to me, but I think we'll put that on hold because we might be rushing straight in, right? When I asked you whether the word healing resonates for you, and you said yes, one of the words that other people say that resonates for them if healing doesn't is growing, and then we go down that conversation. But you used the word outgrowing, right? I think the phrase was outgrowing the impact of adoption. So I'm intrigued by this outgrowing word. So I'm wondering whether you could break that down a little bit for us? What does outgrowing mean?
Yeah, look, I think for me, I felt adoption was just all-encompassing up until the healing journey began that I just described before. Adoption was all of who I was. I felt like my life had been completely shaped everything about me. And I couldn't see outside of that way of being in the world. I felt trapped within it. And, it wasn't all bad. I had from the outside, I had a good life and education. I had what would have been considered a good adoptive family experience. It was a very religious environment. So there was that side of those influences as well. But I just felt like it was all of me. And I was very open about it with people. All through my adolescence, it was about lobbying for law change, writing to politicians, starting support groups, going on a journey for finding my birth parents at the age of 21, way before it was allowed in New Zealand for that to happen. I went under the radar. It seemed there was a fervence in me, a constant fervence to find a way out of the borders and barriers that I felt were just constricting me. I mean, I didn't even have words for it then, Simon, to be honest. I mean, that word outgrowing kind of came to me as I was reflecting on what we were going to talk about tonight. But I think that resonated with me around thriving as well. To me, I was not thriving as an adopted person until I began to grow and outgrow the triggers, the patterns, the pain, and grow more towards my authentic self. I guess post-traumatic growth is another term that might be relevant here. So, and when I talk about it now, I think, wow, for the most part, I don't see myself. I even at one stage, a few years ago, I was running an education and preparation program, and one of my colleagues said to me, "Jo, you didn't mention you're adopted. You always say that." And I was like, shit, I forgot. And in that moment, I was like, oh my goodness, this healing, it really works. I could see, we talked about there are moments we don't know if we're progressing anywhere in the work we do around our adoption experience. And then there'll be a lucid moment where we go, wow, actually, that was a really poignant moment, a significant moment in my own healing. Yeah. That it wasn't shaping completely the lenses that I saw myself in life by. That was really liberating.
So there's a sense there that you went outside, but that didn't bring you peace. So you went inside instead. And it wasn't a conscious decision to go inside. It was brought around by this. It was brought around by you seeing the cracks, was the word that you used when you were 27.
Yeah, that's right.
And when you say outgrowing, I'm just thinking about how I would sum that up, or how you. So let me just. So in as simple words as possible, because simple words land for me. So this is my summation. All right. So I'd love your thoughts on this. Mm-hmm. You realized you were bigger than being adopted. Does that sum it up? How would you?
I think that came much later, Simon. I think there, as I mentioned, there was some intrinsic drive within me that was trying to find its way out of the suffering. I don't think it was conscious for quite a while. I think it was survival, to be honest, at that early stages. But it became conscious along the way, because as I started to experience moments of healing and understanding and growth, then I realized, wow, I'm consciously going to choose more of the things that are going to help me to live beyond the borders of this experience. But in saying that, the way out was through. The way out was through the fog, through the pain, through the grief, through the loss, through the unedited childhood stories and narratives that I'd been telling myself. It was at times a long dark tunnel with glimmers of light in there. But there was a point, and I don't recall when it became a conscious collaboration between the choices I was making and that growth path.
So there were moments when you felt whole. There were more moments as you felt whole, more moments of lightness and less of darkness.
Yes, and absolutely. And they came in just delicate moments in the early stages. And then there seemed moments where I'd be like, oh, wow, it's peaceful in here. I might feel more joy, more connection to life, to myself. And I would notice those moments. And, through practices along the way, spiritual practices, evidence-based practices I played with as part of my healing journey, mindfulness, mindful self-compassion, journaling, neuroscience. I played with all of those pieces reached for them really to see, well, how can they soothe my limbic system, understanding my brain? How had trauma affected me? How had growing up adopted and closed era of adoption, particularly when adoption was seen when I was growing up as it was so shame-based, and my birth mother was sent away at 17, shamed, and came back after having me, being sent away to a small country town, and came back and was expected just to get on with her life. And as a result of the trauma for her, she chose not to have any more children, which is not that uncommon for a lot of the birth mothers that I've worked with over the years, that whether it's been a conscious or an unconscious choice, there's some sort of connection between that traumatic experience and whether they want to go on and be a parent later in life. So yeah, there are so many layers, but there was certainly, I'm just thinking whether it was Carl Rogers said we had this innate, he was have you heard of Carl Rogers?
Yeah, he was educational development psychologist, was he? Something like that, I think.
Yeah, and he founded the theoretical approach of person-centered therapy and counseling, really. And he held this firm belief that the person knew what was best for them, and that there was this intrinsic desire to be whole. And when I read his work in my early days of counseling and therapeutic training, I was like, wow, that really held as a truth for me. And it was a foundational truth that I suppose was very much a partner in my journey. It's like, yeah, there's some part of me knows that I can have a different experience, that there is something more to me than hating myself and abandoning myself because I was so conflicted and confused. And I seem to feel like my non-adopted friends, I just think, oh, why are they not a mess like me over the same things? Why am I so complicated? Why am I so difficult to live with? I was just constantly looking at my deficits and just wanting, having times where I actually wished I wasn't me. Why can't I be somebody else? To today where I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so okay with being adopted, because I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't have the breadth and depth and compassion and understanding. I wouldn't have the richness that this journey has given me. Except when I'm in the holes, which I still, it's a life, I'm always going to have some degree of trigger and response. And when I'm in those holes, I'm like, here I am again. Okay, I know this. you're an old friend. I understand why you're here, and I can meet that suffering now with affectionate curiosity and compassion, and move out of that hole so much more quickly. And each time I get out, I'm like, wow, I just learned something new about myself, and it feels like a whole place to be, despite the wounds and triggers that will always be part of the fabric of my being. I don't know if you know, have you heard of the, I liken it to the ancient art of the Japanese had called the kintsugi bowl. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Have you heard of that?
No, I've not heard of it.
Oh, it's a beautiful craft where the Japanese restored broken china, and they put them pieces back together with a gold filament, and they looked absolutely exquisite. And I see our healing journey as something like that, that as we do this work, the gold is the beautiful growth and strengths that come from doing the work, that make us even more precious and beautiful at the end of it. But the reality is that because we have those broken pieces, we are always going to be, just like the bowl will be, slightly more fragile and less resilient to some of life's stressors, and which means I need more self-care. I need more tools in my toolkit to nourish myself, and so that I don't keep looking out to other people, being needy and reactive, waiting for them to give me what I need. You know, it's does that make sense? Is it?
It does, yeah. I'm just giving you a bit of space and trying to figure out where I'm going to go next.
Well, I'll take a breath while you back that up.
Did you say you said affectionate curiosity towards something, and did you say affectionate curiosity towards suffering? Is that what you said? Yeah.
Yes, I did. Towards my own. When I'm in pain, it's like I used to self-abandon and beat myself up and push it down and punish myself in a way, I suppose with self-criticism, and to now where it's like, oh wow, I know you, I know why I'm hurting, I know why you're feeling this way, and this hurts right now, and be able to be with myself and heal myself in that way, rather than previous to outgrowing adoption. It was just not like that at all. My relationship with myself just wasn't there. And I'll be honest and say, I cannot believe how many decades it took me to wake up to the fact that it's all about being in relationship with ourselves. It's the most important relationship we'll ever have. We come into this world with ourselves. We go out of this world with ourselves. It's like, wow, how did I not see that so much earlier in the healing process?
So is it grace? Is that what you mean?
I think it is, yeah. I think it might be. That word's a beautiful word.
Yeah. So you talked about the desire to be whole. What do you see as the opposite of whole? I mean, is it incomplete? I mean, what word would you use as the opposite of whole?
Yeah, it was interesting because just before I came on to talk to you this evening, I was thinking, actually, in some ways, it's easier to talk about what unhealed looks like, because I was so familiar with that. And I've got two or three people who are very close to me, who are adopted and who have chosen not to do any healing work. And I'm not ever going to say they're not whole. To me, yeah, the utmost respect for adopted people or anyone. If you don't want to do the work, that doesn't mean you're unwhole or unhealed. I definitely don't hold that belief. this journey is not for the faint-hearted. I've often thought that if I didn't have a choice, maybe I wouldn't have chosen it either. But what I see in their experience, and those around them see it really clearly, but they don't, is being filled with anger, being quite isolated, reacting to life's events and relationships in a way that is what we would consider to be overreacting to things, not seeing the patterns, not understanding how adoption, their experience might have shaped them as a person, not wanting to search or know anything about their past. She gave me away, why would I want to look for her? Those kind of statements that, suggest that they've said no to going on any kind of exploratory experience around who am I as an adopted person, or as a human being even.
Yeah.
And those three I mentioned are men. That's just come to me as well. I hadn't. So whether there's a difference, I think there is a difference, to be honest.
So did you say that they are not on whole? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I feel that's it doesn't rest well with me to label other people as unhealed or unwhole. I think I feel fine speaking about myself. And I feel with the adopted people that I work with, they're all at such varying stages on that journey to wholeness. How do I describe one as, I think we're all on the way to being whole once we embark upon this journey. I don't think there's ever getting to wholeness as such. I just think for me, wholeness feels a certain way in contrast to how feeling unhealed felt. But I don't see it as a kind of a linear path that's a diagnostic in any way. I mean, when I start working with adopted people, I always say, how much, what do you know about your experience? How much personal work have you done? How do you feel about being adopted? What do you know about, we're sort of that kind of exploratory questioning, and that will give me some sense of how I might be able to help or not. But there's no judgment from my perspective about whether you're healed or unhealed.
So how would you describe your relationship with trauma?
Oh, what an interesting question. Well, avoidance was the main relationship with trauma for so long until I felt I had enough safety within myself and outside of myself in terms of understanding and doing a lot of reading and research on trauma before I leaned into it somewhat, when I learned how to keep myself safe in doing that. I did have an experience, my earliest experience in therapy, where it was inadvertent. The therapist, can't remember how many sessions, might have been 3 or 4 sessions, and I don't have any memory of what it was particularly that she said or where we were heading with it, but the next minute I was flooded with complete darkness. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't see. And it felt like I was dying, actually felt like I wasn't going to come out of this. But it was her and her staying close to me verbally that helped me to come out of that. And I was in I guess trauma residue for about 3 days afterwards. I felt ungrounded. I felt all heady. I felt sick. And so that for me on reflection was inadvertently triggering the very trauma response that all our patterns are set up to protect us from. And, I would never recommend anyone deliberately choose to go back there. I don't see that we need to do that level of experience to heal the trauma. I think we can become aware of it and lean gently in it with inner resourcing and outer resourcing that can help us retreat to safety when we need to, and how much of that trauma work is it's multi-layered, and I think that's up to the individual to decide how much and how when and how deep. And inadvertently, and trauma just can come up as well without us deliberately leaning into it as well, and it's how we manage that when it does come.
So some people talk, and I don't know who I heard talking about this. They say that we have to break down to break through. So in a sense, that what was happening for you with that therapy session was a breaking down that led to a breaking through eventually. Is that what it? How accurate is that? Is that what it felt like, or what do you think?
To be honest, I feel like the breakdown was literally at 27. That was the breaking down. That was where all the defense mechanisms, the adaptive self, could no longer keep down any of that I'd suppressed so much. I felt like that was the cracking open. The trauma activation, and I think was definitely a part of the healing. I certainly wasn't going there seeking that. I had no conscious awareness that was going to happen. And I really don't know, in the scheme of my healing, how potent that was. I know it really knocked me around, and I know I avoided, I went, I maybe even have regressed a little bit around, whoa, I don't want to trigger that again for a while, until I developed some more understanding of trauma and some more confidence, and then worked with a therapist around my trauma. But that was much more recent. That was several decades later when I felt resourced enough to do that.
One of the questions that's come up over the last, I don't know, 6 months or so ago, or a question or an opinion really, is this idea that coming out of the fog isn't a once and done experience. It's not a singular, it's not a one-off. There's a series of coming out of the fog moments, and it's like first love, I guess. We remember the first time most significantly, and yet it happens again and again. Has that been does that resonate with you? Would that sum up your experience, or do you think it's just a one-off event?
Simon, I can experience the fog when I'm in the hole, wholeheartedly. When I'm in a hole, and a hole is a trigger, when I've been overwhelmed by an adoption-related trigger, like attachment has been a big an example of what trips me up to this day. And I think knowing what I know now about my early experience, I had 4 or 5 weeks languishing in a Karatani unit before I went into my adoptive home, and there were several other interruptions to my early attachment. And in my primary relationship with my husband, this is something we've had to work together on in our relationship over all the years we've been together, because when I drop into the hole and it's so foggy, I cannot see my way out. I can't even self-soothe when I'm at the bottom of that worst hole. I've got better and better at that, and more adept at that. But and then when I'm out of the hole and in a new phase of post-growth, for want of a better word, the sun's out, things are as clear as a bell, insights are pouring in, my heart is open, I feel like, wow, I feel whole. I feel whole. But inevitably on this journey, I'll fall into another pothole, and inside that pothole is the fog. I think the fog is more like subtle dew these days, as opposed to heavy black fog where I couldn't see anything in the dark.
Yeah.
Totally lost. These days it's more like a dew on the windscreen, that if I get my act together quickly enough, I can clear some space to see out the windscreen.
Yeah.
A lot quicker, because I'm like, here you are again. I know what you are, and that's right. What do I need to do to get those windscreen wipers on to see a bit more clearly? I don't try and avoid it. I try to get through it and find there's some other learning here. I'm going to get some other piece of myself back on the other side of this. So I'm going to do the work and the reflection and the processing and the journaling and the talking and whatever it takes to heal and grow through whatever that piece is.
Yeah. I love extending metaphors. I love extending the metaphor. So I love the way that you did that. And at the same time, I'm thinking the difference between whole and whole is just a W.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Interesting.
And I'm also thinking about patience and impatience on the healing journey. And I'm just thinking that impatience is, if we just separate it out and put a apostrophe, it's I'm patient, right? Yeah. But the last episode we did was with a Brit American adoptee who's a comedian. So maybe I should leave the jokes to her.
Yeah, I'm going to get the comedian gene, I'm afraid. Go for it. I mean,
so one thing that popped into my head is you've used two kind of two contrary words, two opposites almost, between exploring our suffering with affectionate curiosity. So you've got explore versus avoid. I can go a bit left brain on these things, right? How do you, so I'm seeing them as opposites, right? You might see it more as a continuum. How do you see that? How do you see the relationships between those two words?
You said, what were they again? Sorry,
Explore,
yes.
Explore, and avoid. And we're talking about exploring trauma versus avoiding trauma.
I think I'm not sure if I'm quite grasping what you're asking or inquiring, but on the healing journey, I think both of those I've held an equal measure at different times. Avoiding when I feel I can't tolerate or I'm not resilient enough. And in the past, early days, I probably wasn't aware of that. It would have been an unconscious avoidance strategy. And then a natural inclination to lean towards and explore with curiosity when I am feeling stronger and in a resourced place. So I feel that they're all part of the fabric. There's just like having different tools to build a house. You don't use one tool. You've got multiple types of tools for different aspects of that, putting that house together. And I see the same with the healing journey as well.
Yeah. You answered it very well, the question, even though it wasn't very well set up. So thank you for that. What do you, other than avoidance, what do you feel, if anything, has caused you to pause on that healing journey?
I think that sometimes life events on the outside, I felt so stretched. So I feel like there's kind of three layers to the life. There was the internal adoption journey to wholeness. There was my professional learning, and it was exceedingly tiring at times, working with adopted people, educating adopted people, writing adoption reports. There was this whole adoption. I felt just sometimes something had to pause, and often between external raising children, having a family, elderly parents, life, death situations, ill health, studying, those were moments where I felt I needed to pause in the healing journey. And even like this year, I've lost 4 people very close to me, and that in itself is actually because I've created the space to be with the enormity of that grief and loss. It's actually stripped me bare right back to the most vulnerable I think I've ever been, because what I realized was that old traces of grief and loss always come back when we're faced with current day ones, the historic. So I felt I thought I was pausing, but in actual fact I've been doing probably more work this year in healing than typically maybe last year. Kind of has a life of its own now.
Did all the work in the adoption space, did that, to what extent did that bring you down, or were you conscious of that, or yeah, I'll leave it at that. Were you aware of that?
I was aware when I knew what it felt like to feel it was all getting too much. I was also writing a book alongside that. But the interesting thing was the incredible desire to keep growing and learning was initially an external thing as well, alongside the internal, that I wanted to help adopted people. I wanted to help people. So I was learning myself and growing myself, and then feeling that I could then partner with adopted people as a counsellor and to help normalize, validate, acknowledge their experience, be able to create a safe space for them to understand a bit about adoption, to help them search, to help whatever way I could. So there was a nourishment in it and a fulfillment and a meaning that helped along the way, but inevitably there were times when other things in life stretched me to the point where I was like, whoa, I'm just going to have to take a breather here, or I'm feeling weary, I need a rest. I was very well supported in that work as well, like a regular supervision, great colleagues. There were other, really supportive things in there as well. I wasn't just isolated and alone in that professional journey.
So you used a word a couple of minutes ago that I'm not sure I've heard recently. You talked about the adaptive self. I think that was the word you used. Is that right? Adaptive self. How do the well, first off, what is the adaptive self? How would you define that?
I would define it that at the outset of birth, at the moment of separation from our birth mothers, that we don't have according to numerous theories, we don't actually have any sense of self until we're around 3 months of age. That starts to develop as separate from the mother. So I feel
that's all humans, right? That's not just sorry, yeah.
Sorry, humans, yeah. And so I have this visual image of being thrust basically into survival, fight, flight, survival mechanisms took over. And in order to be loved, to be safe, to survive, there was adaptations that needed to come into place in order to survive. And that overshadowed the nourishment that the essential or authentic self would have received had that severing not taken place at that vital time of life. That nourishment and that safety and connection was severed, and so the adaptive self had to come in for survival. The tricky thing was that we didn't know any other form of self. The adaptive self was all we knew. And then on top of that was the layers of growing up in adoption in the social cultural era that each of us grew up with, sense of difference, no mirroring, all the stories and narratives around being adopted, not being allowed to know our stories, our heritage, our genealogy, growing up feeling marginalized, all those things layered on that experience. So for the essential or authentic self to grow, in my view, in my experience, is it requires us to go back as adults and offer ourselves all the qualities and ways of being and meet our needs in ways that weren't able to be then, to create that nourishing, nurturing soil, I guess, for that essential part of us to come into being, as Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, and Carl Rogers suggested, is within us. But at the same time, sitting with all the tangles of what we know about early trauma, separation, growing up adopted, sitting with those tangles and getting insights and consciousness around them so that they can dissipate and disentangle at the same time as nourishing the authentic self. So the adaptive self, it doesn't need to be there. It served a purpose, but it doesn't need, it's past its used up by date. It's actually robbing us from the very things that we know that nourish us as human beings. Every human being needs connection, belonging, needs to be themselves. I don't believe it. I've met many adopted people that could honestly say they have those things or experience those things. So the adaptive self was a blessing for our survival, but it played out in perfectionism, pleasing behaviors, fear of rejection, pushing people away so that we didn't activate the archaic memory traces, all these triggers and things going on. That wasn't us living our real life. That took a lot of energy, a lot of sensitivity, constantly fight, flight. We were in hypervigilance mode all the time. So we couldn't be present. You can't be present with and be authentic when you're in fight, flight, freeze form. It's not possible. They're different parts of the brain. So yeah, sorry, the long answer to the short question. It's the adaptive self.
Yeah. So how would you sum up the how the adaptive self, how would you sum up the adaptive self's relationship or impact on our essential self, our essence?
Well, I think it completely, if I've used the adaptive self and our essential self, it was completely covered up. Like that's what the fog is for me. That's the fog. Our essential self can't see, feel, be itself, and
so it hides us. The adaptive self conceals our essence.
Yeah, and its relationship is obviously a survival one. It's not a compassionate one from the heart. It's a mechanism, just like our limbic system. And so I feel like the relationship, it's our essential self in our heart, slowly opening our heart and becoming aware and conscious of the adaptive self, that then rebalances helps the essential self grow. I think in just thinking about the relationship, I don't know that there was a healthy one. They had different agendas. But at the same time, being able to see our adaptive self as being grateful, being appreciative of it helping us get thus far. And there's times where everyone has an adaptive self to some degree, Simon. We're all human beings are socialized, have traumas of some nature, and have an adaptive aspect to themselves. For those of us separated from our birth mothers from the outset of life, that adaptive self is all we've known. That's why I think we can feel adoption as all of who we are.
Yeah. So you've talked about affectionate curiosity, And you talked also about realizing that the adaptive self has done its job. That's the job that it was supposed to do. And to have affection, would you say to have affection for our adaptive self, and see that it has concealed, that the adaptive self conceals our essence. So the metaphor I always, well, not always, the metaphor that I use for that is this diamond in a fist. So the fist represents the anger. So that's me coming out of the fog was expressed through anger. That anger not being the authentic self, and the natural shape and position of our hand isn't a fist, it's being open. So as we unclench our fist, we see a diamond that's hidden, that's concealed. So I talk about trauma hiding our essence, not harming our essence. How would you, have you got a metaphor for that? To what extent does that metaphor feel true to you or resonate with you?
I think what you just described is just, for me, just really illuminates the essence of the whole piece that we were talking about. And it just surprised me that I was doing that. I didn't know about your diamond. Well, I've seen the emblem on your podcast series, but I hadn't quite connected it to what you just shared now. To me, I agree 100% with that.
Yeah. So why don't we see that? Like, why does it take decades to see that, you know? We're back to my patience or impatience, right?
Do you know what's a big piece? I don't know what it's like in the UK, but what we experience here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is even today, with, you know, in 1985, we had the Adult Adoption Information Act, which essentially opened up a pathway for birth parents and adoptive parents. I won't go into the details of that, but it started to crack open society's belief about adoption, that the happily ever after story. But there's still, the reason we can't see it is because we're not, when you're in something, you can't see it. And our experience has not been acknowledged, validated, understood. Even to this day, my main role these days, outside of working with adopted people, is educate counsellors and therapists. And my biggest work is helping them to deconstruct the narrative. They're as blind to it as we are, Simon, because they've been indoctrined in the same narrative that we were marinating in our whole upbringing. So it's, in some ways, it's not their fault, because but it's, again, we have had to do the work of speaking up, speaking out, telling our stories, and a lot of the time being gaslit for that, which is extra painful and can trigger trauma as well. So the reason we can't see it is because no one's acknowledged it until trauma, the latest trauma theory has come out, and an impact on the brain and understanding our neurological system and the impact of trauma on that, and all these pieces of the puzzle. But I've had to put all those pieces together myself. No one's given that to me. And that's what takes so long. That's what takes decades. Damn it! I mean, these days I say to adopted people, "Oh, there's so many things out there that can help now that weren't there before." But there's some people have got different feelings about Nancy Verrier's book, The Primal Wound Theory. But when that came out in 1995, I felt like that was the biggest gift someone outside of the adoption. If an adopted person had written that at that time, certainly in our country, it would have been just completely, adopted person's got issues. That's how it is. If there's a problem, it's the adopted person's problem. It's never anyone else's problem. If they're off the rails, it used to be, say, when I was growing up, or we've got 4 times more mental health issues and statistics and alcohol and drugs and everything. Oh, well, that's their problem. It's the adopted person is the problem, not adoption might be the problem. And so as more and more people are speaking out about it and educating about it, I think you've got Paul Sunderland in the UK. He's been amazing around educating about adoption and the severance that's in what the adopted child gives up. So that's why it takes so long, because it's still denied. We've got something going on in the country at the moment where a television ad to advertise One New Zealand, which is like a Vodafone or I can't remember what they call it. Yeah, and it's a story of a Māori adopted person with Pākehā parents, English parents, who gets told as an adult that he's adopted, given a necklace, and he's on a journey throughout New Zealand looking for his heritage, and it's just causing so much distress in the adoption community, and writing to broadcasting, doing as much as we can to say, get that off. There are so many people out here that is such a painful story for, and they just don't get it. They put it back on us. It's like, oh, well, it's just a light-hearted look at searching for your roots. And it's like, well, does anyone else have to search for their roots? No. If you're adopted, you have to go on that really hard journey. Why would you use that as a sales tool? So we're still up against that. That's why adopted people often don't even know. They just think something's wrong with them, Simon, and that just breaks my heart. Every adopted person that shows up on my website says, Jo, there's something wrong with me. I don't even know where to start. And I'm like, you know what? There is nothing wrong with you. You have an experience that's impacted upon you, and that's where we start.
You mentioned Nancy Verrier, so I can't help but ask my next question. What do you think is wounded?
My first response to that is our essential self. I don't want to say it's our soul, because I feel like I don't know if that is damageable. Because I feel like that's the part of me that's brought me home. I feel like that's the but the wound in the psyche, in the heart, the personality, the mind.
Is our essence wounded?
So is our essence and our soul different in your view?
I'm just posing the questions, really.
I think we could have a whole session on that. I don't really, I don't, there's just different terms for different things, Simon. I'm not sure. I feel like my essential self and my higher self are different things. So my higher self is more my soul, and my essential self is my being. Jo Willis, who, my person is my essential self, and my higher self is that connection with the greater good or whole or God or whatever the term is. And I think that the latter part doesn't get wounded, and is the part that has helped heal, in my own experience, the other part of me that was wounded.
Maybe a question to ponder, listeners.
I feel like it is for me. It feels like, wow, I just would like to spend some more time reflecting on that one.
Is there anything else you'd like to share that I've not asked you about, Jo?
I think just going back to something we talked about earlier about those moments and when we realize how far we've come in healing, and a really poignant one for me I'd like to share, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, when I had grandchildren, I was absolutely obsessed with them, and it was a special birthday for me, my 60th birthday actually, and we were in Australia on a holiday, family holiday, and I was tucked up in bed on the morning of my birthday with my 5-year-old grandson Jack, and he was about this far from my face.
Yeah.
And I
About
said,
3 inches or 8 centimeters.
Yeah, and we were eyeballing each other that close, and I said to him, "Oh my gosh, Jack, I love you with my whole heart." And he looked at me and he said, "Nonny," which is what he calls me, "do you love yourself?" And in that moment, I stopped breathing, and I was like, "Do I love myself?" And he was waiting, but he didn't move. His eyes were just waiting, and I was like, and then I had to reach inside myself and go, "You know, Jack, for a long, long, long time, Nonny didn't love herself. But you know what? I do. I can tell you now, I do." Well, in a flash, he was out of that bed, running down the hall, happy as a pig. And I was left lying on the bed going, "Oh, I just had a really big insight. Oh, look, I can say I love myself." If he hadn't asked me, I might never have realized. So sometimes, just want to say, sometimes we don't realize how far we've come until something happens and we respond to life, to a person, to a situation in a way that we never would have done before. And in that moment itself is so healing, so special. And in those moments, we should savor that. We deserve that moment of joy and that insight, that valuable, precious insight, and savor that. And I'm holding my heart as I'm telling you that, because it was, yeah. And since then, it's just like, oh, I can love myself. Wow. Even saying that out loud was quite revolutionary. Yeah. So the work is worth it. And I felt really whole in that moment, even if a week later I was in a dark hole again for a short while. That was a moment of wholeness, and experience of my authentic self.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
Does a title for this podcast episode spring to mind?
Gosh, so many words just fluttering around. I guess look, I'm just something, I'm not even sure if this is it, Simon, but something like opening our hearts to ourselves. I mean, part of me wants to say coming home to ourselves, but I can always think of Nancy Verrier's second book was that. So that's plagiarism. But there is something about coming home to the wholeness that is within us.
Beautiful. And as always, listeners, check out the show notes for links to Joe's websites and socials, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Thank you, Simon.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye, listeners.